There we go. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you. Thank you. Alejandra, so glad to have you here today. How are you?
I'm doing great, and I'm so excited because I think this is going to be a very not only important conversation, but we need to go deeper as to how do we solve some of these very pressing problems for women. So I'm
Mm,
excited because I can already sense that we're gonna have some good conversation.
awesome. Awesome. So before we jump in, I'm gonna let our audience know just a little bit about you if that's okay, because y'all are in for a treat today. Okay. So let me give all of you a quick rundown on who you have in front of you today. So Alejandra Castillo is the immediate past president for the YWCA, and this is an organization that serves 2.3 million women and girls at over 200 associations across the country. YWCA USA plays a dual role as both a social service provider and an advocate for reform and justice. Alejandra has over 2 decades of professional experience in Washington, D.C., having served in senior leadership in 2 presidential administrations. Okay, she knows her way around the block, you all. In 2014, she was appointed by the Obama administration to serve as the national director of the Minority Business Development Agency, becoming the first Hispanic American woman to lead the agency. In that role, she helped secure financing and capital in excess of 19 billion, that's with a B, okay, and created and retained, over 33,000 jobs. She holds a bachelor's of arts from the State University of New York at Stony Brook in economics and political science, a master's of arts in public policy from Lyndon Baines Johnson School of Public Affairs, as well as UT Austin, and a Juris Doctorate from the American University, Washington College of Law. So, Alejandra, you are a she boss, a she role, like the list goes on. I really want to start our conversation today, really taking a look at that piece you did with NBC News, where you called the economic crisis that we're seeing from this pandemic a she session, right? This is what this session kind of focused on. I would love for you to share what you meant by she
Yeah.
session and what that ripple effect is that you're seeing that could imperil the female future of work.
Yeah, so thank you for that and for that gracious introduction. So a couple of things, it was actually the New York Times that
Oh, the New York Times.
coined the term "she session,"
Ah,
and it
okay.
was, but it's important to underscore because we had never heard that term before, and it captured so much of what we as a nonprofit organization at that moment were seeing. And I want to underscore, nonprofits really have the finger on the pulse. We get to see the telltale signs of society, the canary in the mine, if you will. We get to see
Mm-hmm.
what's happening. So when the pandemic happened and we saw so many women impacted because they were overrepresented in the service industry, hospitality, restaurants,
Mm-hmm.
um, tourism, retail, those that industry in its totality so many job losses, and many
Yeah.
of them were women, and especially women of color. So not only did we see that first wave, then we saw a second wave, which was women who had to leave their jobs because they had no childcare, right?
Oh,
Who do you leave your
yes.
kids with? Who do you leave your child with, right? Schools
Mm-hmm.
were closed. You still had to make ends meet, and yet there was nobody to take care of your kids or to take care of your elderly parents who were so
Correct.
vulnerable. Because we also have to realize it's not just childcare, it's also care in general, whether it's caring
Correct.
for an elderly parent. So we saw all of this confluence, and then we also saw automation. We also saw how companies were using that moment in time to bring in more technology. So the
Mm-hmm.
displacement of female workers. And that really prompted us to talk about two things. One was childcare, which is a
Mm-hmm.
national crisis. And the other one was the future of work for women. How do women pivot? What's the next area or
Yeah.
industry where we can really make a, go into it? And then, as if we didn't have enough to worry about, we still have a pay equity issue that hasn't been resolved. Women get paid so much less to the dollar, and women of color even less.
There we go.
So in general, when you look at the demographics, we live longer, which is great, but we're living longer, being paid less, possibly getting to our elder years in poverty. So we have a whole issue, a whole spectrum of issues that we have to address if we want to get through this economic recession and hopefully, get our country back to thriving.
Absolutely. Man, as you were talking, literally one of the first things that came to mind was how you have women that are already in the workforce, right? And we had to, let's say, work remotely, or we were furloughed or laid off, whatever the case may have been. But that piece, them closing the schools and kids having to return home, right? So now women are expected to still be at the forefront of their jobs if they are still employed, and navigate essentially homeschooling. Let's just call a spade, if you would, right? Like when it first happened, it was such a dramatic change to the norm for how students were educated. And so a lot of parents, and a lot of times that onus fell on the mothers. They had to really figure out, how do I make sure this child of mine is not falling behind and still meeting the demands and expectations for work. And one thing that I noticed, and please tell me if you noticed this as well, with some of the work that I've done with professionals, I've seen a lot of professionals, and women specifically, feel this additional level of pressure to work these absurd hours because of fear that they are going to be let go, or they are getting this pressure from their superiors to perform at a certain level that is unrealistic for the times that we were in. Have you seen that, experienced that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I want to go back because, one thing about us women, and as we talk about not only the Shecession, but how do we talk about the returning to the workforce?
Yes.
But this moment in time, as you mentioned, women screaming, pulling out their hairs because we're now in a much more confined space, dealing with the kids, dealing with the elderly parents, with the partners or whatnot, that we have to also center ourselves in terms of our health.
There we go.
Lupus is an autoimmune disease that impacts women in particular because it's triggered by stress. I pray that we don't have these secondary health issues that are going to impact long term, whether it's mental health issues, whether it's issues with autoimmune disease. So I'm bringing that into the space because in order to really support women, we have to look at the entire ecosystem and we have to look at it holistically. So this moment in time is when organizations, whether it's a nonprofit organizations, PowerToFly, not the private sector, the government, we all have to bring our best ideas forward and really change paradigms. And you said this as we were preparing for this conversation. We have to break the mold. What worked 18 months ago ain't gonna work now.
Nope.
So let's get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because we have to address these issues head on. And they're not women's issue alone, right? They're national issues.
Yes, I agree 100%. So let's actually, speaking of that, let's talk about how you and the work that you're doing now. How is this a response to the disproportionate impact on communities, especially women of color, when you think about the impacts of COVID-19 in the workforce?
Yeah. So as you said before, I literally just stepped down from YWCA, but it's an organization that will always be with me. And like YWCA, there's so many other nonprofit organizations that are on the ground doing the work that is sometimes invisible, I should say, right? And that's why we say that, we do the work when the cameras are on and when they're not. During COVID-19, organizations like YWCA really kept their doors open, responding to the multiple new needs that were bubbling up, like food insecurity, which is real in our country, right? If you lose your job, if you have no income, you can't pay your rent, how do you get food on the table? Whether it was security and safety, we saw that the domestic violence rate skyrocketed in the US and across the globe. That is real. So making sure that especially during COVID, we provided a safe place for women and their children and their families, because gender-based violence is sexual assault, and gender-based violence is still something that women have to contend with. Looking at ways to engage children, right? Whether it's remote learning, after school programs that could still abide to the social distancing, summer programs, health, and as I mentioned, health education in terms of making sure that we're taking care of ourselves, because it was hard to get an appointment with the doctor. But most importantly, also workforce development, right? How do we start to help women pivot, get their skills into alignment with where the economy is going, right? Making sure that we provide opportunities. Not everyone can go back to school and get an engineering degree. That's not going to happen. But how can you do apprenticeship? How can you train women and communities of color to really shape their careers in a way that will meet the demands of the future? And that's still a big question mark, because we're still trying to figure it out. But what we do know is that technology, STEM education, however that is decided, is going to be a critical skill. And then finally, making sure that people can access the resources that are out there. We did a lot of work with women-owned businesses and minority-owned businesses in accessing PPP loans, because it was a resource that the federal government provided. Big companies took advantage of it. How do we help women, especially minority of women-owned businesses, to be able to keep their businesses alive while we weather this pandemic?
Oh my gosh, you dropped so many amazing gems just now. The upskilling piece is so vital, and I'm so glad you mentioned the STEM industry, because what I want to remind everyone that is listening out there is that piece that you literally touched on, where it was like, everyone can't go and get an engineering degree, right? Like, we're not saying that. Right. However, these are the industries of the future, right? This is almost like the direction that the country and the world is going is geared heavily towards STEM related industries. And so you don't have to be an engineer to be in an engineer, work for an engineering company. And so really honing in on, ways to upskill is extremely important. And like you said, that access to healthcare, it has adjusted because of the pandemic, and someone asked actually in the comments, which I think is a really good, a good question to bring up, which is, when you think about the detriment to our health with trying to balance everything, how do you, or how, not only how do you personally kind of manage the stressors of this time right now, but how have you helped others, right, that are in these predicaments where it's like, I am at home, I have been laid off, I was already making, let's say, barely enough to cover the bills, and now I'm trying to figure out, how do I re-enter the workforce and make myself competitive and still balance my own sanity with trying to deal with my kids, my spouse, or lack thereof? How do you manage stress, Alejandra? But then also, what advice do you have for women that are in these situations trying to navigate this space that we're in right now?
Yeah, it's such a great question. So look, I'll be very brutally honest.
Brutal.
I'm a type A personality, right? And I'm very competitive. And when COVID hit, I'm a New Yorker. I was like, this is not going to define me. I personally declared war on COVID-19. And our organization at that time, we just revved up and we answered the call. But we didn't know this was going to be such a long haul, right? We who knew this was going to be beyond a year? And what I learned in a very painful way was that old model that I yearned for and gave me that instinct to fight. I had to let go of that too. I had to say, okay, competitiveness right now is not the way to go. I have to temper myself, pace myself, choose my battles.
Sure.
You know, I had a friend yesterday who told me that her washing machine just died on her. I said, don't worry. Kids love dirty clothes. Just let them wear dirty. It's okay. Pick your battles. Pick your battles. Because we can't be this perfect being all the time. It eats away at us. So COVID has taught me how to modulate myself. Okay. But I will also say, this could be a very interesting moment because now we didn't know what Zoom was back in, January of 2020. Now Zoom is our best friend. Yes. And that is a great benefit. I know we're all tired of Zooms, but let me tell you, there's some great gatherings, learning opportunities. I'm doing a 21-day meditation challenge with a group of friends. Find those areas that you can learn, grow, and give to others. Because this is a long game, and how you weather this moment in time is going to be a defining moment for future challenges, right? Because there will be future challenges, unfortunately. But I will tell you that we are women of privilege. Even though we're both women of color, we are women of privilege. We can work from home. Yeah. I have family members that can't, that have had a lot of challenges because they were frontline workers, essential workers. They're in the most vulnerable of industries. So we have to be grateful and give grace to others. And then that's where we have to mentor. So mentoring women, what should they do? I'm mentoring, my niece is 27. She was in the hospitality industry, and now she's doing a master's online. Take this moment to reinvent yourself. We talked about the butterfly, which is one of my favorite metaphors. This is our metamorphosis. It's uncomfortable, it's painful, but we have to really think of how are we going to reinvent ourselves. And it's a big challenge. And then ask for help. I always use this phrase: if you want a friend for life, ask for help. This is the time for folks to ask for help. Not everybody may help you, but you're going to find somebody who's going to be in your life that's going to give you some guidance and advice, open a door of opportunity. And you never know. So this is an amazing moment to be humble. And for people like myself, being a type A personality I can shed that. I can definitely shed that now.
Yeah, I love the piece, especially on asking for help, because I know that is something that I had to learn to do. I was so bad at it. And it's, I don't know if it comes from, or I can't say that I don't know, because I know part of it does come from being from a underrepresented background, coming from the type of communities that I'm in. It's kind of like, as a Black woman, you don't have time to, ask for help or ask for handouts. We don't ask for handouts, this mindset and this notion. But it's so important, like you said, to ask for help, because closed mouths don't get fed. How is someone going to know what you need if you don't speak up?
Yep. And help comes from various sources.
Yeah.
Help comes from our allies, our male allies. Help comes from people who are different from us. Help
Yes.
can come in so many different iterations and from so many different sources. So be completely open to
Yes.
where that guidance is going to come from. And again, if there's something that you've been yearning to do, but you've never been able to pivot, this is the time. Ask, go on LinkedIn or some other, platform. Find people who are in the space that you want to be in. A cold call, say, hey, I'm interested in being in that space. I'm trying to
Yes.
make a pivot. Would love if you have 15 minutes to talk with me. You never know. You never
Oh
know.
my God.
I get LinkedIn calls all the time, emails all the time. I'll make sure, let's have a chat. My
Yes.
job is to make sure that people don't have to go through the same painful moments that I had to go through. And there's no need to do it alone. And that's an important message.
Yes. Oh, I love that. Putting ourselves out there. I preach it all the time. LinkedIn has so many resources, and a lot of times all you have to do is just that one line that you said, hey, this is where I'm at. This is what I'm trying to do. I would love about 15 minutes of your time just to learn, some strategies, tips, anything you could share that can help me with this pivot. You can very much so find somebody who will talk about you in rooms that your name would have not otherwise been mentioned in, simply from that call. You establish this buy-in from others, and they invest in your growth and in your success. So thank you so much for saying that,
Yeah.
Alejandra. That is so vital.
And I think that the next question that we have ties
Yes.
back to this, right?
Yes, it does. It does. You can see it. I didn't know you could see the questions.
I can see it too. And here's what I would say. Look, we live in a world of algorithms, right?
Mhm.
Where jobs and jobs when you and the question here says, what free resources do you recommend for women that are unemployed?
Mhm.
So a couple of things, like, how do we get ready to go back into the workforce? One is, if you have a resume, if you have a LinkedIn account, make sure it's updated. The
Yes.
second thing is, if there's an industry that you're interested in going into, look at what type of skills are they looking for. Make sure that your resume and your profile are aligned with those skill sets, because here's the deal. Many folks, many companies are getting thousands of resumes, and
Yep.
they put them through a computerized algorithm. And if you don't have those keywords that they're looking for, guess what? Your resume gets kicked out. So
Yep.
let's be more tactical on how to present yourself, right? So that your resume can really link up to the whatever the algorithm of the search is. So that's one thing. The second thing is, whatever the industry is, um, get on a different trade conversation. So let's say you're in hospitality. Follow the different major hotels and
Yeah.
see who's their HR person. Depending on which areas do you want. Obviously, the hotel industry is going to take a while to come back, but boy, when we're ready, that industry is going to just skyrocket, because
Oh yeah.
everybody's yearning to
To
go
travel.
somewhere.
Yeah.
So be ready. Find new skills also, or new training that you can put on your resume as well. So
Mhm.
be in the space, and find people who are in that space. I'm not in hospitality, but I'm in government,
Mhm.
or in the nonprofit sector. And it's finding a job is takes diligence,
It
right?
does.
So I'm not suggesting in any shape or form. So I'm trying to be very intentional. What I am suggesting is be in the space, find people who have the job that you'd like. Tell them, hey, how did you get it?
Yes.
What should I do? Strike up conversation, be in the trade, or in the network of conversations. And so the virtual setting really helps, really does help.
Mhm.
And then, make sure that your resume is accurate, that your interviewing skills are good, practice with somebody,
Mhm.
and find a
Yes.
mentor. A mentor is somebody, mentors come in all sizes and shapes and colors. And
Yes.
find somebody who will again take an interest in you. How do you do that? Relationships, being very though, and those are important. So I don't profess that there's an easy solution, but I do recommend just go out there, because the more relationships you can find, the more conversations you can strike up, the more somebody's willing to vouch for you, the easier it'll be to get that job. And again, it's a journey. It's really a journey.
It is. Being patient with yourself is important also, it's a marathon. I think you said that it takes a lot of diligence, right? Like it's a marathon nowadays with the labor market and job searching. Is definitely not the way it was before, even prior to the pandemic. When you think, just years back, it's very much so more competitive. And in line with that question that was just asked, I'm going to try to squeeze one more question in. So when we think about the childcare workers that are in the country as a whole, right, and how they are literally like low wage worker, 96% of them are women of color, right, like females and women of color. And so what can we do to better support this vital sector, which the pandemic has shown is more important than ever? I know I'm out here looking for nannies left and right, somebody to come help with these kids. So please, can you share as we wrap up how we can better support the sector?
So, when we started this conversation, we have to look at childcare not as an individual crisis of how hard it is for you to find a childcare. It's a national crisis. And the Organization of Economic Development tracks childcare among the most industrialized countries, and the US is at the bottom of the barrel because we do such a poor job. And the reason they track it is because childcare is so linked to productivity, to reducing absenteeism in the workplace, to making sure that women can go to work and not have to worry. So there's an economic link to childcare that's not just about women finding solutions on their own. The nation has to find a solution to this. So a couple of things, I'm in DC, so I live in the world of policy. The fact that this next relief package has over $50 billion for childcare is great, but that's not enough, right? So government has to do a better job, but the private sector also has to do a better job. These should be benefits that our employers provide us, because guess what? Our employers benefit from our labor. And again, it's refocusing. But I will tell you, write to your members of Congress. Make sure that when they are your employer is engaging you on the type of benefits that they need to put in place. Childcare is one of them. Pay equity is another. So, because again, it's double whammy. We have a childcare crisis, but we're not getting paid as our counterparts. So how do you have enough dollars to pay for that? But this is a national conversation, and be part of that conversation. Just don't complain about it. Be part of it. Read what's happening, reach out to your members of Congress, and get involved in any way that you can.
Thank you. I love it. Oh my God, the time went by so fast. Before we leave, can you tell people where to find you really quickly if they want to connect with you?
Sure. So you can always connect with me via my personal email, which I give freely because I love connecting with people. And that's Alejandra Y Castillo @gmail.com, or connect with me via LinkedIn. I have lots and lots of folks that I'm connected via LinkedIn. And I love to put people together and just create that ecosystem to solve problems. I may not have the answer, but somebody in my network probably does, or at least can lend an ear to just figuring out how do we help one another, particularly at this moment in time.
Thank you. I love it. Thank you.